All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're zeroing in on a totally pivotal moment in George R.R. Martin's masterful text, a chapter that serves as a profound thematic transition. We're looking at a moment where the very last vestiges of childhood innocence collide violently with the harsh, unforgiving realities of survival in the North. We're going to break down exactly how the author uses sensory details, pacing, and sudden, shocking violence to thrust two young characters into adulthood way before they're actually ready.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, a return to the saddle. Then, shadows of war, the Wolfswood ambush, and finally, the burdens of leadership. Let's get into it.
Section 1. A return to the saddle and Bran's adapted ride. So, we began at the gates of Winterfell with young Bran Stark. A light snow is falling, and Bran can actually feel the flakes on his face, melting as they touch his skin like the gentlest of rains. He's sitting straight atop his horse, watching the iron portcullis get winched upward, and try as he might to keep calm, his heart is just fluttering in his chest. You have to remember, he hasn't been outside Winterfell since his tragic fall, yet he is absolutely determined to ride out as proud as any knight. Now, traditional riding requires you to grip with your legs to stay steady, something Bran obviously can't do anymore. Instead, he's relying on this brilliant adapted setup. He's strapped into an oversized saddle with a thick horn and a high back, which was actually drawn up for him by the imp, Tyrion Lannister. His mount is a small 2-year-old chestnut filly named Dancer. She's been trained special by the stableman Joseth to respond entirely to rein, voice, and touch. After a fortnight of just trotting around the yard on his own, Bran is finally taking her out into the open. As they head out, passing through a mostly deserted winter town where less than 1 in 5 houses are even occupied, Bran feels a bit unsteady at first. But the huge saddle cradles him, and those straps around his chest and thighs hold him secure. Pretty soon, the swaying rhythm begins to feel almost natural, and this tremulous smile creeps across his face. Of course, the piece is briefly interrupted when they pass the smoking log alehouse. Theon Greyjoy spots a local girl named Kyra and makes a crude joke, earning a sharp warning from Robb. Theon just smiles that arrogant smile of his, like the whole world is a secret joke, only he's clever enough to understand. Bran ignores him, though. When Robb checks on him, Bran just says, "I want to go faster." Robb smiles, picks up the pace, and Bran snaps his reins. The sensory momentum just explodes here. His cloak billows out, the snow rushes at his face, and smooth as silk, Dancer slides into a gallop.
He outpaces his guards, catching up to Robb 2 miles beyond the Wintertown, right on the edge of the Wolfswood. Bran shouts, "I can ride!" grinning ear to ear. It felt almost as good as flying. This brilliantly illustrates his triumphant emotional peak. It's a moment of restored autonomy and absolute freedom. For a brief, shining second, the boy who loved to climb feels like he's flying once more. But as we know with Westeros, moments of pure, unadulterated joy are incredibly fragile.
Moving on to Section 2, Shadows of War and the Avalanche of Bad News.
The transition from Bran's high-flying joy to his brother's heavy demeanor is honestly jarring. Robb jokes about racing, but Bran can tell something is really troubling him. Robb's auburn hair has grown shaggy, and with this reddish stubble coming in, he looks way older than his 15 years. And it's because the political dread and violence of King's Landing are steadily creeping up the King's Road and bleeding right into the north. Just look at this timeline. Weeks ago, word arrived that their Uncle Benjen went missing beyond the wall. Recently, their mother completely upended things by taking the imp prisoner, and a raven from literally last night brings devastating news. Jory Cassell has been murdered by the Kingslayer, and their father, Eddard Stark, has had his legs shattered. Talk about a suffocating avalanche of bad news. And because of all this, Robb is forced to articulate the terrifying reality of their situation. Still, the honor of the North is in my hands now. He tells Bran that their father instructed him to be strong, to be the Lord in his absence. This quote perfectly captures Robb's sudden, inescapable thrust into adulthood. He's 15 years old, and the heavy, terrifying burden of leadership, of potentially calling the banners and going to all-out war, rests entirely on his shoulders.
Section 3. The Wolfswood Ambush, a Brutal Awakening.
So, the abstract threat of war suddenly becomes intensely physical and immediate. The pacing of the narrative shifts dramatically here, becoming fast, chaotic, and deeply tense. Robb rides off for just a moment to check on the howling direwolves, leaving Bran isolated near a rushing stream. Suddenly, ragged strangers emerge from the brush. 6 wildlings and deserters surround him, armed with rusted spears, axes, and jagged knives.
Crucially, 2 of these men are wearing the black rags of the Night's Watch. As Bran remembers his father saying, no man is more dangerous than a deserter, because he knows his life is already forfeit, right? He'll flinch from absolutely no crime. And here's the tragic irony of the scene. Those very straps on the custom saddle that just gave Bran his freedom are now trapping him on his horse. He's completely vulnerable and alone.
But before the ambushers can harm him, Robb returns, and more importantly, so do the wolves. Let's take a quick pause to remember what Maester Luwin and the Kennel Master Farland taught Bran. A dire wolf isn't just a big dog. It has a bigger head, longer legs in proportion to its body, and a markedly leaner, more pronounced snout and jaw. The text describes them as having something gaunt and terrible about them. And in a matter of seconds, these ambushers are about to find out exactly how terrible they can be.
The clash is brutally efficient. Robb shouts, "Winterfell," and just plunges down the bank. He strikes a rushing man full in the face with his sword, with a sickening crunch and a spray of bright blood. He then matches blows with the tall wildling woman, Osha, parrying her spear thrusts in the freezing stream until she overextends and he rides her down. The white water of the stream instantly turns red.
But the true, raw violence comes from the dire wolves. I mean, they rip through the ambushers with this terrifying, animalistic fury. Summer tears at the belly of a wildling woman named Holly, slamming her backward. When a 6th man tries to scramble up the bank and run from the carnage, Greywind emerges dripping from the stream, bounds after him, and hamstrings the guy with a single snap of his teeth. It's a visceral, chaotic bloodbath that unfolds in mere moments.
And this brings us to the climax of the fight. The biggest man, Stiv, has managed to pull Bran from his horse and is holding a dagger tight to the boy's throat, demanding Robb kill the wolves or Bran dies. The tension is absolutely unbearable. Bran's hair is being cruelly twisted, and then a low thrum from the woods. A half-foot of razor-tipped broadhead explodes right out of Stiv's chest. The arrow is bright red, painted in blood. Stiv collapses into the stream, the dagger falls away from Bran's throat, and Bran watches the man's life swirl away in the rushing water. Theon Greyjoy has taken his shot.
Section 4. The Burdens of Leadership and the Aftermath.
The violence ends as suddenly as it began, but the horror definitely lingers. The guardsmen finally arrive, looking pale and nauseated at the scene. And in the quiet after the storm, the shifting dynamics among these young men become sharply defined. We see Theon's pride contrasted directly against Robb's fury. Theon steps out from the trees, smiling, boasting that a dead enemy is a thing of beauty, incredibly proud of his unbelievable archery shot. But Robb doesn't thank him. Robb furiously lists every single way that blind shot could have failed. What if Theon had missed? What if Stiv was wearing a breastplate under his cloak? What if the arrow had hit Bran instead? This brilliantly illustrates the difference between Theon's reckless, thrill-seeking arrogance and Robb's growing, calculated, and terrifyingly real sense of responsibility for his family.
The boy who was playfully joking about racing his brother just an hour ago? He's gone. So the crucial point is how Robb completely takes control of the grisly situation as the acting Lord of Winterfell. He issues his first real, cold commands. Hack off the Night's Watch deserters' heads to send back to the Wall as a message. Leave the wildling corpses for the carrion crows, and as for Osha, the surviving wildling woman begging for mercy, he spares her life, but ruthlessly asserts his authority, ordering her hands bound to be taken back for questioning. Which leaves us with this lingering, haunting image. A morning that began with the gentle melting of snowflakes and the pure joy of a boy riding his horse again has ended in slaughter, severed heads, and the grim reality of northern justice. With the direwolves unleashed and tasting human flesh, blood permanently spilled in the Wolf's Wood, and the terrifying prospect of calling the banners looming over them, we have to ask, after such a sudden and violent loss of innocence, are the boys of Winterfell truly ready for winter? It's a question that the rest of the saga will answer in blood. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you in the next one.